Hey guys, welcome back. So I just want to jump into section 2 today of chapter 10. As I've said before, you should be reading these sections. You should be reading these sections. All of you. Terrence, Sawajid, who else? Jude. Read the sections of the book. Alright. So, today we're going to be looking at section 2, which is protest, resistance, and violence, which is really about slavery. Now, we're not going to do the whole section today. We will finish the section tomorrow. I have an assignment for you today that I need you to do. Tomorrow there will be no assignment. We will just be doing the lecture. So, let's jump into it. So, the main idea is that pro-slavery and anti-slavery factions disagreed over the treatment of fugitive slaves and the spread of slavery into the territories. So, not only do they agree on the central issue of slavery, but they disagree now on things like, what do we do if a slave runs away? What do we do if slavery is beginning to move into the Western territories? So, let's jump right into it. I'm going to tilt this down a little bit. See my beautiful mug. All right, why it matters. The anti-slavery leaders of this time period become the inspiration for future civil rights leaders, okay? And here are some things you need to know from this section. You need to know the Fugitive Slave Act, which you were introduced yesterday with the Compromise of 1850, the Personal Liberty Laws, right, which we'll get into in a minute, the Underground Railroad, Harriet Tubman, and Harriet Beecher Stowe in her book Uncle Tom's Cabin. We will get into the Kansas-Nebraska Act, John Brown, and Bleeding Kansas tomorrow. Let's get into it. So, runaway slaves began being returned to slavery after the Compromise of 1850. Remember, one of the main things, really the only thing the South got in the Compromise of 1850 was the fact that there would be a harsher fugitive slave law, that slaves would be returned to their owners if they ran away. Northern states despised this. They hated the fact, actually, if you go to the beginning of section 2 in your book, which you should all do, it's posted in classroom, remember. There's a scene where a freed man, a man who had run away from slavery, was being returned to slavery in Boston, and it was a huge scene in Boston. People were really upset that it was happening. So the northern states passed these personal liberty laws, which said that runaway slaves should get a trial, that they should not just be returned. And what they would do is they would draw these trials out into 3 or 4 year processes, where a person would never actually be returned to slavery, right? That's the point. So let's quickly read this quote by Frederick Douglass. He says, "The colored man's rights are less than those of a jackass," a donkey. "No man can take away a jackass without submitting the matter to 12 men in any part of this country," meaning they have to go to trial, right? You can't take away life, liberty, or property without a trial, although that amendment, the 14th Amendment, didn't exist yet. "A black man may be carried away without any reference to a jury. It is only necessary to claim him, and that some villain should swear to his identity. There is more protection there for a horse, for a donkey, or anything, rather than a colored man." So this idea that these poor people were being subjected to this. Why is Julia Fortunato writing me? All right, becomes a big deal. And now here's why this is so important. Let's take a look at this question. Wow, did you see that effect? Did you see the level of technical ability I have? Bam. Okay. I'll have to look later. What effect did the Fugitive Slave Act have on abolitionist feelings in the North? Here's the effect that it had. It made a lot of people abolitionists who had never been abolitionists before. It really made people despise the institution of slavery who really never had an opinion before. All right, so this is Harriet Tubman. She is the main conductor, as they called it, on the Underground Railroad. Now, it is not a real railroad. There were no tracks under the ground, like into a coal mine. No, it was a term given to it so that they could hide its identity. If you were taking the railroad, that didn't sound that strange. It didn't sound to the average person like you were escaping from slavery. So it was actually a network by which it was run by abolitionists And freed blacks, freed people, we'll start to call them freedmen soon, even if they're women, right? Like mankind. They called it the Underground Railroad, and it was led by Harriet Tubman. Now, Harriet Tubman is really a fascinating figure. She is an escaped slave. She married a freed black man in Maryland, which was not that odd for the time. Maryland had a lot of free African Americans. She will free, personally, over 300 slaves, earning herself the name Moses, the nickname Moses, right? Like in the Old Testament, where Moses leads his people, the people of Israel, out of slavery in Egypt. So it's a very, very apt nickname. She makes 19 trips. She frees over 300 people, including her parents, becoming one of the great symbols of resistance to slavery. All right, now, I put 2 videos in this slide, and you'll see why in a second. So this focuses on Uncle Tom's Cabin, which was a book, a novel released. It was produced or written by Harriet Beecher Stowe. Beecher Stowe plays such a big role in the start of the Civil War, it's hard to overstate it. She actually, when she meets Abraham Lincoln says to her, "Here is the little lady who started the Great War." So her book is such an anti-slavery, it's such a big part of this movement that it's hard to be undersold. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to look at why it sold over 1 million copies and why it convinced so many people to oppose slavery. So I put up 2 videos here that I want you to go watch. This is why the lecture is a little bit shorter today. They're both from Khan Academy. Watch part 1 first and part 2 second. You already have the PowerPoint, I believe. I'll post it again in the assignment just so you have it. There's only one thing I disagree with in part 2. They talk about the Second Great Awakening and religion, and they basically say that the Puritans believe God to be all punishing all the time. That's really not a fair characterization of how they viewed God. But aside from that, the video is pretty good. So go ahead and watch that. For your assignment, let me zoom in here. For your assignment, you need to go to Classroom, and there's something called the Slave Narrative Assignment. Now, the Slave Narrative Assignment is you're going to look. There are 3 links. Pick one of those links. What you're going to do is you're going to listen to one former slave. These recordings were done in the 1920s and 30s and 40s. These are the last living former slaves. Okay, these people are still alive 60, 70 years after the Civil War. The Great Depression was only 60 or 70 years after the Civil War. So you're going to listen to one of them. That was confusing. One of them, and then you are going to answer the questions. All right? Have a great day. Let me know if you have any problems.